guess I'm curious how, if you were to rate, however you'd want to, out of 5 stars, let's say, of how reliable you suspect a personal experience to be as far as leading you to truth, what would you rate that as? I don't have to um you had a couple beliefs that I wanted to get to, so in no particular order, the one that I think I'm most interested in is the God belief. Um
Yeah.
do you want to, the way that I like to start is by getting an idea of your confidence in the claim. Would you be comfortable with using the claim a God exists?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's fair.
What there's a scale, and we don't have to use it if you don't want to, but it helps me to kind of see where you're at. If we were to rate your confidence on this God existing from like 0 to 100%, where would you put yourself? With like 100% being, if I drop this, it's going to fall every time, to like 0 being no chance in hell.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it is tough because I sit in kind of maybe not a conventional place with my belief in God. So I'd say probably 60%, 70%, somewhere in that kind of mid range, 2/3 probability.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, I want to ask a follow up question on that, but just to get like a general idea. Oh, maybe we'll save that. Um, 60 to 70% confident. Can you tell me, um, when you think of that confidence level, what are some of the reasons, or maybe the biggest reason that gets you to 60 to 70%?
Yeah, so I mean, I think in general, I think the logical part of my brain says, the probability of God is probably less likely um, than it actually being true. Um, but I do, you know, for my personal self, kind of believe that in somewhat of a higher power, and it is a little bit difficult to describe. I think it's more of a feeling than some sort of logical truth, and so a feeling of whether you're out in nature or you're just kind of feeling whatever, there does seem to be some sort of call it higher power of some nature, and I do think there's something to that, given kind of beyond just people's desire to feel connected to something bigger than themselves. I think if you look at cultures throughout all of human history, there's been kind of this notion of something bigger, and some sort of connectedness. And so whether that is Christianity, Islam, Native Americans, you kind of see kind of the same themes prop up a bit time and time again. And so I guess, and even in kind of modern day, this whole notion of spiritual but not religious. I think that there is something that people feel that they can be connected to without necessarily defining it in terms of like fixed like book cover kind of aspect of all encompassing. Everything you need to know is contained within, these couple hundred pages. So I guess that's kind of where I lie, in that I think there is something bigger. I don't exactly know how to define it. I don't think that anyone out there really has fully defined it, but yeah,
Sure.
kind of rest on that. Yeah.
So I'm hearing you say kind of the biggest thing is that you get this feeling that leads you to think that there are or is something like a higher power.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. It's kind of a difficult to describe kind of feeling or emotion, and I'm probably not the best one to be super in tune with how to describe that or articulate it. But I think there is some sort of kind of spirituality that people connect to, and I can definitely relate to that and feel that myself.
Is there can you think of maybe a comparable belief that you have somewhere in the 60 to 70% range that you use that same reason to come to that confidence of having this feeling?
Oh gosh, I mean, not off the top of my head. I'd say in most things, I am probably able to be dissuaded one way or another. Given a good argument. And so I guess that's where I would pull back from saying that I am 100% sure in much of anything, because I think I leave the door open to being wrong, and I think there's nothing better in life than being wrong and learning something new. So that's just kind of my personal approach to kind of especially bigger topics. And again, like, it's something like God, I don't think anyone knows. And anyone who says that they know without a shadow of a doubt, I think is lying to you, is my, kind of personal belief.
What let's use 65% since that's right in the middle of the range you gave me. What would get you to, like, what would you have to see or learn or find out to get you to say a 75%?
Oh, I mean, you'd have to see something almost irrefutable. Something, some sort of divine intervention. Which again, I think I don't believe in divine intervention. So I think that's unlikely. I think with the my personal belief that it's probably a likelihood that there is some sort of higher power, however you want to define it, that they're more it is more hands off than going to somehow intercede in any sort of like direct event, type of thing. But you'd have to see more sort of like concrete proof, I guess, than the abstract of what we have, like an abstract of a feeling. My logical side needs more to be dissuaded on the other end of the spectrum.
Well, okay. Inversely, then, what do you think you could see, learn, hear, find out that would get you from a 65 to say a 55?
Yeah, I mean, I think if there was more of a logical explanation for, I guess, maybe the overall kind of spirituality feeling that I think is common and continues to kind of show up in people, time and time again. So, I mean, my logical side kind of thinks like the explanation could be something along the lines of, are the electrons that make up, our bodies. Those electrons are most likely in us at any given time, but they also can be anywhere at any given time. And so maybe there's, an explanation that the connectedness that we feel to, to nature, to spirituality in some sense is really just, our electrons being shared amongst, different things at any given time. And I guess if there was, some more scientific proof, that would get me more to a point of a logical explanation for, something abstract, like a feeling, that we might have.
I'm wondering, when it comes to feelings, I know I asked you the question about maybe a comparable belief, but I guess I'm wondering, like, is it possible for a person to have a feeling about something and be mistaken about what they're attributing that feeling to?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I guess, the first thing that comes to mind is like unrequited love, right? Like you can love someone, you can be in love with someone and have that feeling not be reciprocated. Um, and then is that true love, or is that just one-sided? Um, I guess there's also probably a debate to be had about that, but yeah, I think the things that we feel and our experiences are somewhat unique to our own kind of personal experience throughout life, and as much as you know someone, you can never truly know 100% of them. um, and I think that's true, and I think that's probably true of ourselves as well, because we do have our own kind of perception bias as to how we experience the world, and how we interpret things that happen or feelings that we have. So yeah, absolutely. I think that we can be mistaken in how we are attributing feelings and associating them.
Sure. Um, I guess I'm curious how, if you were to rate, however you'd want to, out of 5 stars, let's say, of how reliable you suspect a personal experience to be as far as leading you to truth, what would you rate that as?
I mean, for me personally, I mean, probably 2 stars. It probably low on the spectrum. Um, I think I personally am not good at handling adverse emotions, or things of that nature, and so they can spiral. One thing can lead into another, and I think that's a little bit of kind of the human experiences of connecting kind of all of these experiences together, and building kind of a larger story, but that is not necessarily reflective of truth. I think that there is objective truth, but that's also probably hard to get at, because we all kind of interpret events through our own, personal biased lens that we view the world based on our past experiences.
Yeah. I think I completely agree with that. The other reason that you mentioned, along with the feeling, the personal experience thing, was this idea of cultural history, and I guess what I'm hearing you say is something like throughout time we have different cultures sort of relaying the same idea of a god, and so that lends itself to your 60 to 70% confidence.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so I don't think that anyone has, totally gotten it right, which is, hard to define myself as, if I had to put myself in a category, I guess I'd describe myself as Christian. Although religion in and of itself as a whole very much irks me. But I do think there's this aspect of, kind of continuing to circle around the same overall notion and idea. Different religions and cultures might put different rules and aspects. A lot of those kind of based on, their cultural needs at the time. But, I always kind of come back to this old Brad As lyric from Casadega. The Bible is blind, the Torah is deaf, the Quran is mute. If you burned them all together, you'd be close to the truth. And to me, what that means is like every religion has kind of gotten a piece of it, but no one has quite gotten it all fully encompassed, and I think that would be extremely difficult to, or if not impossible to do without some sort of otherworldly whatever. But that's also where I kind of draw the line on religion too. Is Christians would say that the Bible is written by God through man, and I just I don't believe that. So take that for what it is.
Sure. Yeah, I'm curious, as a sort of thought experiment, if you say you didn't or you weren't aware of, you could even keep, because I know we kind of grew up in a sort of similar fashion. Say you weren't aware of all these other cultural histories involving a god, and so you didn't have that reason in your sort of basket of reasons. Do you think that would affect your confidence level at all?
Possibly. What I will say is, I grew up in a extremely religious household, and so that has been ingrained in me from the day I was born. And I think that probably more than anything makes it hard to get to like a 0% confidence in a god. There will always be a part of me that can't fully reject the notion of a god, because that is ingrained in part of who I was growing up. Religion also, from how I was raised, also now carries a lot of baggage. But there is kind of that balance overall, I'd say.
Yeah. I guess I was thinking of asking you this much earlier, but maybe now would be a more appropriate time. When you think of God, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, and I probably don't have a super well defined answer to it. Um, to me, God is, you know, something bigger, that potentially laid out kind of all of the wheels and gears that caused life to be the way it is. I think there is a beauty in both in kind of just the totality of it all, and in kind of the mathematics behind it. I mean, when you get into like the golden spiral and um, yeah, and so I to me I don't necessarily see God as some necessarily like singular physical being that I have a one-on-one conversation with, that forgave me for all my sins and all of that. And I guess this is where, even though I would just define myself as roughly a Christian, to me, like, regardless of if Jesus Christ was the Son of God, God incarnate, whatever, or just some dude, I don't think that actually makes a difference to any of my beliefs. Um, I think he had the right idea. And if you go back and read the Bible and just kind of pull out the things that Jesus spoke. Ultimately, I mean, he boiled the Bible down to and Christianity down to love God, love your neighbor, and that's about it. Um, and I think he had the right idea. He basically rebuked religion as a whole. Lenders in the temple making money off religion. You know, criticizing women for having children out of wedlock, and he hung out with tax collectors and prostitutes. So regardless of whether or not Jesus Christ was, some deity, I don't think matters. I think he spoke truth, and I think that's why it has hung around and resonated with people. And we have just gotten so far away from the point of it all. Um, yeah.
So, kind of hearing you say this God is maybe a creator, maybe like a fine tuner, if you will. But maybe as far as that God being like a personal sort of thing, your confidence is pretty low in that. I'm just trying to repeat back what I
Yeah.
think you're saying.
Yeah. I don't think that God, as whatever he is, knows or necessarily cares about me as an individual. Um, it is part of something bigger. Um, and I guess this kind of goes back to, I mean, back in like 2014, 2015, I was trying to create, some form of AI, and really kind of got into pondering kind of the abstracts of how you would create like true artificial intelligence. Um, and ultimately, like, you have to get, kind of the cost functions, the reward structure for learning new experiences, and how to interpret that. But ultimately, like, if you wanted to create unique individuals, how would you go about that? And the answer is life. It is this, a complex system where you're having unique experiences kind of all around the place. And so that is kind of more the lens in which I view God, is more of, the creator of the program that we are living in. And I don't really buy into like this is all a simulation kind of theory, but overall that's kind of, I guess, where I see things kind of through the lens of is this is how you would create that. And as a programmer, who's tried to do something very basic along these lines, do I care about the element 10,061 out of a million? Am I particularly interested in that one and the events that they are that iteration of this program is experiencing? No, it's about the totality of it all, the experiment. So I guess that's kind of my overall lens that I view things through, how I can understand things.
I'm curious, why, or maybe I'll ask you this first. Do you think if you had grown up in a different circumstance without the Christian upbringing, do you think that your confidence in the creator God would be different?
It's an interesting question, and it's hard to necessarily answer. I mean, I will say, my wife grew up in a vaguely religious household. Went to church on Christmas kind of stuff, but their household weren't practicing Christians, anything like that. And later in life, she came to firmly believe in God and the Bible and kind of much stronger faith than I have. And so I think it's interesting to kind of view things through the different lenses. I think that growing up in a very strict religious household, going to private Christian schools for most of my life, probably works to my detriment in terms of my faith, because I almost know too much. Where people who have become Christians in their 30s or later in life, they've maybe read. They probably haven't read the Bible, cover to cover ever, and probably have a vague understanding of each of the kind of prime stories out of it, versus I grew up memorizing entire chapters of the Bible and reciting them. And so I almost know too much and know too much of the historical context of all of these different things that it becomes difficult to see it for the sparkly shiny thing that I think some, whether they're born again or they're kind of newly found Christians have. I can't view religion and Christianity kind of through that sparkly lens that other folks have.
I think I understand. Yeah, you have so much history with it that it's not like a new shiny thing for you. It's like sort of built in already.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's someone wants to talk about how great this story is in the Bible and how this proves their point, and it'd be like, well, but did you know that this was like going back to something in the Old Testament, a prophecy from Daniel, and actually that was written because of XYZ that was going on at the time, and there's just so much that I connect too many dots, kind of along the way, that it just kind of loses a little bit of its impact on me personally as kind of this, great love story. I think that's overall kind of the sentiment of what people would describe the Bible as is kind of the ultimate love story of God to man. And yeah, it's not quite that, not that simple.
Yeah. Can I ask, why do you, is there a reason that you, sorry, I think I have to sneeze. I'm trying to hold it back. Is there any particular reason that you choose to take on the Christian label, however loosely you do?
I think it's, if someone were to ask me, it's the closest that I can get to describing where I'm at, right? So I don't know, spiritual but not religious somehow, like, just, I don't know, irks me to my core. And so I can't label myself as that. And I've never really studied Islam or Hinduism or Native American religions to any sort of extent to call myself that. I do think that Jesus was a real guy. Whether or not he's the son of God, as we talked about, doesn't really matter to me. I think he had the basic ideas right. And so that is kind of the, I guess, overall tenets that I would kind of follow. And so I think that's the closest approximation that I can get. Calling myself atheist or agnostic, I think is not quite as accurate. So nothing is going to be 100% accurate in describing me, but you got to pick the closest label that's going to be generally understood, I guess.
Mm-hmm. If you, say 5 years from now, through whatever means, you came to the belief that Jesus wasn't a real person, would that do anything to your confidence?
No, not really. I mean, I think there is enough historical evidence at this point that he probably was a real guy who walked around on the earth. But if it turned out that he wasn't, I think the overall ideas and sentiment that he proposed was in line with what I believe. And again, I think that Christians as a whole just, I don't know, I seem to read it differently than religion as a whole, and that's probably more on me than I can't judge everybody else for interpreting it one way and me for interpreting it differently. But I look at the Bible and Jesus's sentiment as rebuking religion and these rules, and there's a reason why Christians don't follow the law anymore, the Old Testament, because Jesus said, like, no, all these rules are bullshit. Like, get over it. Like, this is not important. Like, who cares if you have tattoos? Who cares if you have piercings? Like, this stuff, you can eat pork. God does not care if you eat pig. And all of a sudden, like, now modern day is like, no, you can't be gay. You can't do this, you can't do that. I mean, in my private school growing up, you couldn't have your hair longer than eyebrow length because that was a sign of being a prostitute in Jesus' time, if you're a man with long hair. So, like, all of these, like, we've just gotten back to, like, this rule structure and this performance-based religion. And that is exactly what Jesus taught against. Is it's not performance based and it's not about making money. I mean, I think we all can agree that like Joel Osteen is like a terrible human being, and like all of these like, you know, TV preachers, whatever. I mean, I guess that's where I relate Christianity, modern day Christianity, to closer to like an MLM, multi-level marketing scheme, where people are just trying to make money off of it. You know, back when Hurricane Harvey hit, like Osteen closed his church in Texas instead of letting people in for like refuge, and it's like, I'm pretty sure that's like the exact opposite thing that like the whole religion is about. But I mean, there is a whole culture of prosperity gospel, which is like, if you are a good Christian, God will reward you financially. And part of being a good Christian is giving money to the church. And I mean, you know, it just annoys me to no end that, like, you know, if you're in any like populated city, you can't drive a mile without finding, you know, $1 million, $5 million, $50 million church building out there. And all of those churches have to, raise funds to pay their staff and whatever. And it's just like, how much more good, if Christianity is about like doing good and spreading the gospel and all of that, like, why is there a church on every block? Like, how much of that could go to actually helping people versus paying your taxes and staff and whatever? It just feels like everything has gotten so off the mark that, you know, it's hard to, that is my overall problem with even labeling myself as a Christian, because to me, you know, I have all this association of everything that's kind of wrong. Again, like, I'm just me. Who am I to judge? You know, the consensus seems to be that this is the way it should be. Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of curious. You didn't mention it at the beginning, but I'm wondering if we go back to your basket of reasons, and the first one you mentioned was this feeling, and the second is the cultural history and themes throughout time. Does the Bible fit into your confidence at all? Does that affect it?
I mean, no. You know, the Bible is what it is. You know, I think it's a good read, and it's a good general guideline for some of the principles that maybe we should follow, you know, to be just decent human beings. But the Bible is certainly not without its faults. I mean, the Bible is a bunch of letters written by, you know, disciples, and, you know, put together by the Council of Nicaea back in, like, I don't know, the 2nd century. You know, and they picked and chose which letters they were going to include and which ones they weren't. So the idea that this is like some holy bound, you know, God stamped, you know, perfect book, I can't get behind. It's It was put together by man, decided, you know, by man. You know, that's, you know, the Catholics have the Apocrypha, I think that's what it's called, which is, you know, extra books. You know, you can, back when, you know, I remember going and seeing when the Dead Sea Scrolls were at, you know, one of the history museums here in Minnesota years back, which aren't in the Bible, right? I think some of them are written by, I don't even remember anymore. But, like, again, it's, you know, the Bible is put together by people who picked and chose what they were going to include and what they weren't. And there is definitely, you know, if you go into the stuff that wasn't chosen to be part of this, you know, cover to cover book, you know, there is a lot of conflicting information, because it was written by disciples who were kind of interpreting the general Jesus vibe, and they were writing to specific, cities and leaders for problems that they saw in, those cultures, and how to address them. And so it isn't some necessarily like holy guide, overall.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, I was only asking because I'm curious how much, if any, of that weighs into your confidence. But it sounds like for the most part, if the Bible wasn't around, you would still be at 60 to 70%. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, taking the Bible as, the general message, I mean, you still have to have, the same ideas out there in some form, but, if the Bible was markedly different, I don't think that would necessarily wane on my overall confidence of, an overall spiritual feeling out there.
When we talked about the feeling reason, you said you would give that about 2 out of 5 stars. What do you think about the sort of cultural history idea of God? If you were to weigh that out of 5 stars, how where would you put that in terms of reliability for
Yeah, I mean,
claim?
yeah, so I mean, I'd say, kind of the cultural, like, time and time again, regardless of, cultures being, separated, and not having contact with one another, that they all kind of generally circle around some of the same ideas and notions, I guess, gives me more confidence. So I'd put that, at, closer to like 4, in kind of as a backing up, I guess, a little bit of confidence level. Just because, like, you continue to see kind of the same overall themes in very different ways, right? But the idea that there is something bigger, I think, goes beyond just, I think the cynic would say that, religion is just a tool to control people. But I don't think that you would continue to see it time and time again in every culture in kind of a vaguely similar fashion, just because it's an effective tool. You would come up with other methods to control people than a higher power.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we had another example of something aside from God that, say, we could look back throughout history and point different places in time and say these people had idea X, way back when, and then these people on the other side of the planet had a similar idea to idea X. Do you think that, I know it's kind of hard without knowing what idea X is, but do you think that you would still rate the reliability of that idea being true as 4 stars out of 5 stars if we took it off of God and put it on something else?
I mean, yeah, the only thing that comes to mind when you're talking about idea X would be like, the notion of a calendar. Where you have like the Aztec calendar, and then I don't know what you call it, but Europeans developed a calendar, and they are different, but overall they kind of get at the same idea. Of there is some sort of like circular time frame to the days, the years, and how many hours there are in the day, and maybe those fluctuate. Your different calendars might have different number of days in the year, or different number of hours in the day to get to that final number, but they still are kind of getting at the same idea through. I mean, that is a much more scientific, right? They're getting there through observation. through stars rotating in the sky and day night cycles, seasons, all that kind of stuff. But I guess that's what comes top of mind of like another idea that has permeated through like multiple cultures through time, and they've kind of come to roughly the same conclusion.
I gotcha.
Although that one has like physical evidence, so it's not a one-to-one.
Sure. Yeah, I was trying to think of something that is in a similar like supernatural vein, but I'm wondering, you gave this cultural history idea 4 stars in terms of reliability, and feelings 2 stars, but you mentioned feelings first as like your major reason. Do you think those should be like that, where feelings are still your number one reason and then the cultural thing sort of next in line as far as how it weights towards your confidence? Or
Yeah, I mean, I would still put them in that order, because I guess I would weight my own personal experience above. It's my personal experience, but understanding that kind of in our conversation on truth, like my personal experience might be biased through whatever lens I am viewing it through a combination of past experiences, where then I'm using kind of the cultural framework to back things up, to kind of give myself a little bit more backing, because again, with the notion of like God and spirituality, you don't have necessarily that physical evidence to that scientific proof to back up your statements, and so it's hard for me to come at things and say I have 100% confidence in my belief because I have some internal feeling that I can't fully articulate. To me, I have to look to something else to kind of back that up a little bit.
yeah. Well, I think I understand it pretty well. For the most part, it's the feeling, but a lot of what goes with that is the cultural history to back it up, and the way that you were raised, and not necessarily as important, but also the stories in the Bible that sort of lead you to this level of confidence. And then you rated your reasons. I think we dug into them pretty good. Do you think, just to wrap it up, I guess, after having this conversation, do you still feel pretty comfortable saying 60 to 70% confidence?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I've necessarily kind of changed any of my views. I think it is good to articulate or try to articulate them a little bit, because a lot of this, is not something that you generally, necessarily talk about, especially someone like me who, doesn't necessarily fit into a norm. I can't go into a church and start, spousing off about, Jesus, who cares if he's like actually God? That's not exactly gonna fly. But
Most
it is
churches.
good to, sometimes you have vague thoughts, and it's good to try to articulate them and kind of crystallize them a little bit. But yeah, I'd say I'm probably not more or less confident after speaking to them.
Cool. Right on. Is there any questions you had for me, or if you wanted to know my thoughts on the topic, or your thoughts on the conversation, or anything?
Yeah, I guess it would be interesting to know kind of your thoughts on the topic. I don't know if that's something you want to get into. I know you intend to stay neutral, so
It's
you
not.
certainly leave that be. But
Yeah, it's not necessarily part of the practice, but a lot of the practitioners that I know like to offer that up as an opportunity just to make things seem more fair.
Yeah.
So yeah, outside of the SE, um, if I were to think about my confidence in a God existing, I'd probably be around the 5% mark or so.
Yeah, can't rule it out completely, but little to no.
Yeah. Yeah. Very little confidence, but certainly willing to change my opinion given the evidence that I would require, I guess. Yeah.
Well, yeah, evidence is a hard thing, and it's that's something that I struggle with, myself. Is there whatever evidence that people try to throw at me? It's like, yeah, that's not evidence. There is nothing scientifically, logically provable about whatever evidence you're gonna throw at me. And so that is like a huge hole in every religion out there. Is it takes this leap of faith, which I just is a little bizarre, but I guess again there is that part of me that just saying there is a God doesn't sit right, and saying there isn't a God doesn't sit right, and you gotta find what side of the coin you fall on, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there are definitely things that I can think of that I'm probably much closer to 50% confidence in. This topic in particular, I've spent I know I told you this probably at some point or another, but Hannah's dad is a Baptist pastor.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so when we started hanging out, I realized and this I was probably an atheist around 17 or 18, but not for intellectual reasons. And when I found out that he was a Baptist pastor, I was like, oh no, I don't know anything about anything. And so luckily that led me down this path of inquiry, and it's been pretty beneficial. What did you think of the conversation? Did you like it? Did you find it beneficial at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's definitely kind of fun to talk about things that are borderline taboo, I guess, to necessarily discuss like in depth. And so I think that's one aspect of this that is kind of beneficial or fun to engage in. Yeah.
Sweet. I'm gonna take that as a personal 5 stars.